Welcome back to Exit Algorithms, the show where we decode what it really takes to scale, exit, and preserve the legacy of your business. Today, we'll focus on creating a life of meaning, a crucially important topic for entrepreneurs who want to stay in the game long term and get the most out of life, both while building their business and in the life after they exit. Today's guest is someone whose life reads like a movie script, but with the heart of a mentor and a message that's deeply relevant to our mission here. John Graham has dodged bullets and avalanches, survived a shipwreck in the Gulf of Alaska, and mediated conflicts from South Africa and the Middle East to US environmental battles. He's got degrees from both Harvard and Stanford and shares his stories and lessons on radio, television, and podcasts around the world. But more than anything, he's built a life around helping others find purpose through service. As executive director of the Giraffe Heroes Project, he spent decades spotlighting people who stick their neck out for the common good and helping others do the same. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, Pete.
Yeah, so glad our paths cross. I can't wait to get into this. Yeah, John, you have an incredible background, and we could probably talk for hours about it with various crazy things that you've experienced in your life. I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of tell a little bit about yourself, and especially leading up to the shipwreck in the Gulf of Alaska. You say that was a really impactful moment in your life. Would love to hear more about that.
Well, sure, yes. There's a lot to tell. I guess the bumper sticker for my life, Pete, is that I'm lucky to be alive. Uh, I have engaged in more near-death stuff than most people do. Didn't start out that way. I grew up in a very placid little city, Tacoma, Washington, where nothing ever happened, and nothing ever happened in my family either. We were all very much by the book, and I was expected to go to high school, then go to the University of Washington, come back, marry the girl next door, yada, yada, yada. Well, strange things happened in high school. I won't go through all the details because I know haven't got all the time in the world. But I ended up getting a job when I was just 17 years old on a freighter going to the Far East. Now, in those years, freighters weren't container ships. They didn't exist at the time. Freighters were big ships that took all kinds of goods, and they were run by 50 or 60 really tough guys like Terry and the Pirates type stuff. And I found myself thrust in the middle of this for a summer when I was just barely 17 years old. And all these seamen took a look at me. I mean, oh man, this kid, he knows about nothing. So they were determined to give me life lessons that they thought I needed and that I would never forget. And they didn't disappoint. This being a family station, I'm not going to give you all the details of all those life lessons, but you can imagine 17-year-old with a bunch of seamen out in the Far East. I tell you one thing, though. I left on that ship desperate to get away from Tacoma because I was being bullied a lot. And I couldn't defend myself. I didn't have the body to do that. And I was looking for role models as to how, what to do with the bullies. And I couldn't look to my own father. I mean, I love my dad, but he was a very gentle guy who himself was being pushed around constantly, losing jobs, losing contracts, because he didn't have the wherewithal to fight for himself. So, and looking to be a tough guy, my dad certainly wasn't the model. So all of a sudden, I find myself on this ship, right? And the very first night, I'm out on deck, and one of the seamen starts approaching me, making sexual advances. And another seaman, great huge guy, big black guy from the engine room, must have weighed 250 pounds. He grabs this first guy, slams him up against the bulkhead, bashes him across the face, and then out of him came the most magnificent stream of cussing I'd ever heard in my life. Nor had I ever seen real violence. And this guy, whose name was Roy, just threw this other guy like a rag doll down on the deck. Oh, it was magnificent. So I remember going back to my cabin that night and in front of the mirror, I would grab this imaginary foe and slam him up against the wall. And I would try cussing like Roy, because Roy was the example of manhood I was looking for. Couldn't find it in my father. So, and that whole trip to the Far East was a huge opener. I mean, here from Tacoma, Washington, all of a sudden I'm in the color and the drama and whatever of the Far East in 1959. I mean, there was the crew, and then there were barroom brawls, and there were all kinds of stuff going on in Hong Kong and Singapore and Philippines. Man, it just opened my eyes, and I came back and I wanted more. My life had changed completely. I could never live in a placid place like Tacoma. And so I began to start reading books about adventurers and stuff, and I wanted so much for my life to be like that. A year and a half later, I'm out. I'm hitchhiking in Europe, and I'm at a youth hostel there, and I see a newspaper that says that there's a war going on just a few hundred miles south. The rebels are trying to take over Algeria, which had been run by the French for a long time, and there was a colonial war going on. So I said to myself, "Hey, that's an adventure. I'm going to go down and and see what that war is like." I mean, hell, I was what, 19, 20 years old. What do I know? So I hitchhiked down through Morocco into the Algerian border, and there's nobody at the border because there's a war going on, right? So I walk across the border into Algeria, and at least I'm smart enough uh, to um, to sew an American flag on my shirt so that I'm not taken as a Frenchman and shot by the rebels. I needn't have worried. The rebels were delighted to see me. They would even stop cars at gunpoint, tell the driver to take me wherever I wanted to go. So I'm in Algeria, and I stay with Foreign Legionnaires who are just like Roy. They're big and tough with tattoos and muscles and stuff, everything that I wanted to be, and I wasn't. And so I determined then and there that I was going to be big and tough like John Wayne. And so I came back. I rode crew for Harvard and started climbing mountains, gained 30 pounds of muscle, and I gave myself the body I needed to be a tough guy. And so midway through university, I was with a group of fellow climbers, and we made the first direct descent of the north wall of Mount McKinley, Denali. A climb that's so dangerous, no one's even tried to do it since. It's insanely dangerous, avalanches, rock falls, crevasses, whatever. And we walked away without a scratch. So I was sure then that I was indestructible. And all I wanted to do was one adventure after the other. So after college, I hitchhiked around the world, except for the oceans, of course. And I had a contract with the Boston Globe to write a story on every war I came across. So I waded into wars in Cyprus and Laos and Vietnam. Again, walking away without a scratch. And every adventure just made me more insanely wanting the next adventure. But then I found myself in Australia where nothing much ever happened. But I also realized that I needed a way to support myself because I wasn't independently wealthy. And if I was going to live a life of adventure, somebody had to pay me for it. So I figured out, oh, that must be the U.S. Foreign Service. So I applied for and got into the U.S. Foreign Service. And I told them to send me to not to places where I had to wear a coat and tie and embassies in Europe, but to jungles and deserts. And they did that. And so I was in the Foreign Service in that kind of environment. My second post was um, in Libya, and I was in the middle of the revolution in Libya, and where everybody else at the embassy was freaking out because of cars burning and rock throwing mobs. I thought it was terrific. I loved it when cars were burning in the streets and the mobs were throwing rocks and shouting anti-American slogans. I thought it was great because I was in my element. It was yet another adventure. So I survived the Libyan revolution, and then I tell the State Department to send me to the most difficult and dangerous spot they've got in the war in Vietnam. And they do. They send me as advisor to the city of Hue, a city right on the north end of what was then South Vietnam, and just 50 miles south of the demarcation line, the DMZ, that then divided North and South Vietnam. And sure enough, I was there for a year and a half, and it was insanely dangerous. I was a target for assassination or getting blown up every day I woke up. Um, and that's what the job was. It was Part of it was dispensing aid, but the rest of it was a political job, working with intelligence and counterintelligence and dangerous stuff. And again, I was totally subsumed by the war. And I thought, by the way, that the war was wrong. I knew it was unwinnable. I thought it was stupid. But I didn't care because I went to Vietnam as an adrenaline junkie. I didn't give a damn. I didn't even care who won. It was just me and the adventure because I'd never been in a shooting war before. And that's why I went to Vietnam. But then my life changed. Toward the end of my tour, I was in the middle of the so-called Easter Offensive when the North Vietnamese attacked 1972 and tried to take over the entire country. They failed then, but 3 years later, of course, they succeeded. But in 1972, they sent troops south toward Hue, the first target, and there was a tremendous battle, the Easter Offensive. And I was in the middle of that battle as advisor to the city, and it looked pretty dire. The North Vietnamese tanks were within 6 miles of the city, and I was there trying to establish a stable base area because the South Vietnamese officials had mostly fled. They were chickened. They backed out. They ran down to Da Nang. So there was only a few of us American civilians trying to hold the city together. Because the American troops, by the way, had left by then under the withdrawal arrangements. So it was just a couple of us civilians trying to establish order in the city and prevent a panic. But we didn't do a very good job because deserters from the South African army had taken over the city and they had burned the marketplace and they were terrorizing the place and making it that much easier for the North Vietnamese to conquer it. So my job was to stop the deserters, and I figured I didn't know what to do, but the mayor wasn't doing it because he'd fled. So I screamed at the deputy mayor to set up a firing squad, start shooting these deserters, even though I didn't know if that would help. And I did know that these deserters were all farm boys, dragooned off their rice paddies, maybe just the month before, given minimal training and thrown into the front. And they were drunk out of their minds and they were raping and looting. Yeah, they had to be stopped, but they were basically innocent farm boys. And now I was lining up against poles and shooting them. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, I hated the war. I knew it was wrong. My home was 8,000 miles away. And yet here I was making life and death decisions, and I had no right to do that. And I was only in there for the adventure, the adrenaline rush. That's the only reason I was there. And yet I was causing people to die and making life and death decisions for that year and a half in Vietnam. And it was apparent to me then how shallow my life had become. The only thing that mattered was the adrenaline rush. I could see all kinds of suffering and violence. The only thing that mattered was my own wish for adventure. I didn't give a damn about people suffering. But all of a sudden I did. As I set up that firing squad, I realized that I had to change my life. Turned out the next morning, fighter jets from carriers off the coast, U.S. carriers off the coast, the weather had finally cleared, and they bombed the hell out of the North Vietnamese advancing columns and destroyed them. So my life was spared yet again. But I came back from Vietnam, went to California for a year, had a lot of what's now called PTSD. I'd walk on the shadow sides of the streets in Palo Alto, California to avoid sniper fire. But mostly it wasn't just PTSD. It was trying to get my life straight, to realize how shallow I had become and to crawl out of that hole. So I went to a bunch of what were then called in California encounter groups, where groups of people got together and spilled their guts and tried to learn from each other's pain of how to improve their lives, and turned out to be quite helpful for me. All the other men in these groups, they kept saying, "Hey, John, we get your John Wayne. We get how tough you are, but that's not really who you are because we also see something compassionate. We see a heart in there." And I realized then that they were right, that what I had done with my life up to that point was like hammering a big, thick piece of plywood over my heart. So I couldn't feel my heart, couldn't feel my emotions. Only thing that mattered was my John Wayne and my adrenaline rushes. And these men were pointing that out. And it suddenly occurred to me that they were absolutely right. And it was a real defining moment of my life. I mean, I just sat there and cried. I mean, because I realized that these guys were right. I had to turn my life around. I had to undo that plywood. I had to find my heart. And I did, but it took years. Luckily, the State Department sent me up to New York to work at the United Nations, and it was the perfect opportunity because there I was put in charge of America's policies toward Africa and much of the rest of the so-called third world, and where there were enormous numbers of peace and justice issues, violence, disease. And because I was smart and tough and knew how to get things done, I could really make a difference. And so I set about at the United Nations doing that, but trying to make a difference on these peace and justice issues. And I went way further than my own government wanted me to go. My own government then, even under Jimmy Carter, the only thing they cared about was fighting the then Soviet Union in the Cold War. They didn't give a damn about Africa, and the Africans knew that. So they hated us. And so it was hard for me to build trust with the Africans, but I eventually did. And I began working with diplomats from the third world, especially Africa, on peace and justice issues, trying to make things better. And the big thing that I did was collaborate with them on exposing the gun trade to South Africa. Turned out that the apartheid regime, the white South Africans that were imposing racism on South Africa under a system called apartheid, were doing it with guns and military equipment supplied by the United States and European gun merchants. And American government was looking the other way because there was so much money to be made, corrupt people in Congress, whatever. And here I was trying to help end apartheid. My own government warned me to go slow, but by then I was unstoppable. So I did all kinds of things, including stuff that could have got me fired, handing classified documents to African diplomats about who was responsible for the gun trade, for example. And I finally built up so much pressure on my own government that it could no longer be avoided. I remember once I got a copy of a cable sent to my boss, the U.S. Secretary of State, from an African foreign minister, just really screaming at him over the cable that about American hypocrisy in allowing all these guns to go through, which supported apartheid. And I realized that I, in the center of that cable was a sentence or two that I myself had drafted a month before, given to my contact in New York, who sent them to his boss in Africa, and they'd come rocketing back as part of this foreign minister's blast at the American Secretary of State. And I had done it. Anyway, I finally got to my own government and I says, look, we can't ignore this. We're looking awful. We're looking like complete hypocrites. And I convinced my own government to back a tough arms embargo, a restriction, an end to sending guns to South Africa. And the Europeans had no choice but to follow suit. So in the spring of 1980, yeah, the UN enacted an arms embargo on South Africa. And in time, that arms embargo helped end apartheid. And I was responsible for a whole lot of that. So anyway, there I was. My life had turned around, but now I couldn't stay in the Foreign Service because it was moving way too slow for me. And then I was just a fire. Everything I used to make life miserable as a young man and my adrenaline rush, I was now using to make life better. And the State Department was moving too slow, and they were about to fire me anyway. So I left, and that's where we come to your original question, Pete. I was there, I left, but without any thought of making money, so I was going broke. And a friend comes and says, "Hey, you can make money lecturing on cruise ships. All you have to do is get on a cruise ship, give some half-hour lecture on, foreign policy or NATO or whatever, and they pay you absurd amounts of money. Hey, it's a good deal." So I got the first job I applied for, and I took my then 13-year-old daughter on a fancy cruise ship, leaving from Vancouver for a summer in the Far East. And I had to give a couple of lectures. Okay. So 3 days out of Vancouver, we're 140 miles off the Alaskan coast, and that damn ship catches fire and starts to sink. And there's 550 people on board. And most of them are rescued by helicopters flying 140 miles from the coast. But the problem is that a typhoon is coming on, a big typhoon, Typhoon Vernon, I think it was called. And anyway, so the seas began to rise, and after a time, the helicopters can't fly anymore. I see my daughter rescued, and that's good. And most of the people are rescued, but there's 8 of us left in lifeboat number 2. The helicopters can't fly anymore, and now we're in the middle of a typhoon in a little cockle shell of a lifeboat. And the seas are rising to 30 feet, which means like you're going up and down 60 feet. And the winds are gusting to 60, 65 knots. We're all dying of hypothermia. I know that from my mountain climbing. We're all terribly seasick and we're dying. Helicopters can't fly anymore. And so I'm looking around and thinking, okay, this is my last adventure, I guess. After all this lifetime of adventures, finally my luck's run out. I'm going to cash in. The chances of me being rescued are really slim. But the key thing was the light, Pete, because this was still a bit of daylight left, although it was October in Alaska. And it was a tiny chance that this Coast Guard cutter, who was frantically searching the storm in a typhoon, could find us. But once it got dark, we had no lights, no flares, no radio, nothing, no warm clothes. And our fates were sealed because the Coast Guard cutter could never find us in the dark. So I look up into the storm and I think, okay, I don't know about praying. I wasn't a very prayerful type guy. But I says, I don't get it, God, or whoever it is out there that's running things. I don't get it. Here I am. I'm a good guy now, right? Yeah, I'm not so proud of what I did in my early life, but I'm now a good guy. I helped end apartheid, and now you're wiping me out just as I'm getting started. I mean, I could do a lot of good in the world. Isn't that what, God wants me to do? Be a good guy? Well, now you're wiping me out. It's just plain stupid. So my prayer became this angry bleed. I got angrier, angrier, and angrier at God for wiping me out. It seemed so stupid. And so I screamed at it, God, how can you be so stupid? And the answer came back real loud. The other guys in the lifeboat didn't hear a thing. And maybe it was just the wind, but I'm sure I heard this voice. And it basically said, stop kidding yourself and stop kidding me. You're lecturing on a cruise ship because you're panicked over money. If you get out of this, you'll lecture on another cruise ship. And your wonderful ideals, the ones you were using at the United Nations, are just going to ebb away. And if you want the rest of your life to be failed ideals, well, you might as well die out here. But you can make another decision. You can really get serious about your ideals, about making the world a better place, and you could have a different outcome. So I look into this storm and I'm totally beaten. And I say, or whisper, I guess it was, I just say, yes, okay, it's a deal. And in that instant, and I know everybody listening to this, watching this, is going to say no, but I swear it's the truth. In that instant, the Coast Guard cutter Boutwell comes slashing through this wild storm. It's coming straight at us. It would have cut us in two had the lookout not seen us. And I'm rescued, and the other 7 guys were all rescued. I kept my promise, came back to New York, kept my promise. And just about that time, I met a woman named Anne Medlock who had started something called the Giraffe Heroes Project. Not about animals, it was about getting people to stick their necks out. In other words, take risks, but to do so to help make the world a better place, to solve public problems, large and small. Maybe a community problem, maybe a national or international problem like global warming but to get active in solving public problems. So she was helping people build the courage to do good by telling the stories of people already doing good. So she found these giraffe heroes, these special, courageous people solving problems. And she began telling their stories, at first over vinyl records. Some of you, some of your listeners, viewers may not even know what it is, but it's a piece of black plastic that goes round and round on a turntable and sound comes out, a vinyl record. Anyway, he began telling them on vinyl records and sending them to small radio stations, or it was paper faxes. But anyway, Anne started that in 1982, telling stories in a way of inspiring other people to stick their necks out. And I met her about that, and I thought what she's doing was, frankly, was kind of lightweight. But then I fell madly in love with her, and everything she was doing became a lot more important. But mostly, it wasn't just being in love with Anne Medlock. It was understanding the power of what she was doing. I mean, I was out there giving wonderful speeches to the anti-war movement, trying to establish peace, and nobody was listening to me. But everybody was flocking to what Anne was doing because storytelling is the most powerful way of changing people's behavior. And it's been that way for tens of thousands of years, from Neanderthals around their campfires. You want someone to be heroic in your community, you don't preach at them. You tell them a story of someone who's already heroic, and they follow that example. And that's all that Anne was doing. She was kind of the troubadour of our ages, and she understood the power of storytelling. And so did I after a time. So since 1984, Anne and I have been working together on the Giraffe Heroes Project, which, by the way, is giraffe.org. And we have a website, and we now have over 2,000 stories on that website of inspiring stories of people sticking their necks out. And they're men and they're women, and they're working at every problem you can think of from every corner of the planet. But they're all inspiring stories. And in those years, we've also created a curriculum for kids, for schools, kids from kindergarten through high school. I've written 5 books, all on the themes of courage and service, and some adventures. And we've been doing that now for, what is it now, 43 years, and we're not stopping. You mentioned my TikTok channel. That's something I just started. I want to reach a younger audience, people third my age. And so I started a program on TikTok called Badass Granddad. And it's all about me telling a very short story of one of my adventures, and then using that story to lead into some life lessons that follow that adventure. It could be a life lesson on perseverance or courage or whatever. But I managed to slide that life lesson in while I've got people's attention. And then there's always a call to action for young people to get off their phones and start looking around to see what they can do. So I've been starting Badass Granddad, and it's going to be on YouTube very shortly. It's now on TikTok. So here I am, I don't know what's next, but I keep doing this, and I'm not going to stop. And being on your podcast is a great honor for me. And I love telling these stories because it's yet another chance for me to talk to people about how important it is, and how important it is to look beyond what they're doing, whether they're a captain of industry or a neurosurgeon or a barber, doesn't make any difference. But you want to find meaning in your life, and I'm just telling you, you'll find it in some kind of service. Not Mother Teresa, not sackcloth and ashes, but some kind of doing good, solving a public problem. Like I say, it could be in your community or much further abroad. I'm going to shut up now because I've probably taken most of our time, but you did ask, and that's a very long answer, Pete, to your question.
Oh, John, thank you so much. I think it's really important to hear the background, and that's such a powerful story. I loved hearing it. So thank you. I found it really impressive that you were able to pivot. You're kind of able to channel your desire for risk taking, and then eventually, change career paths. But it seems like it took basically a near death experience for that to happen. Do you see that as, a requirement, or how can listeners how can listeners find direction without waiting for a crisis?
Oh, people ask me that question all the time, and my answer is a resounding no. I remember I was on a panel discussion in a conference center in New York State some decades ago, and there were 3 of us on the panel. One of them was, I guess it was it Ed White, one of the early astronauts, and there was another guy who was a assistant secretary general of the UN, and then there was me, and we were all supposed to talk about answering your question. What does it take to make that U-turn in your life? And so the guy at the UN says, "Well, I was in the middle of the underground in France during the Second World War, and of course it was dangerous, and it taught me a lot, and that's where I developed the convictions to do good in the world." And then Ed White, the astronaut, says, well, it was floating around on the moon and going, and I was in the command module, but floating around the moon and seeing this incredible vista and being one of the first astronauts out there, it totally changed my life. And I saw that there were much bigger things than anything I was worried about on the Earth. There was a huge stuff out there to do, and that's what changed my life. So then it comes to me, and I tell the lifeboat story about how my life changed with this storm and the sinking boat. Okay,
Mhm.
so we tell these stories, and there's an applause, but it's kind of like a timid applause, tepid applause. I expected more because these stories were all, really. And finally, there's a question and answer which explain what's going on. And this young man in the back of the room gets up and he precisely asks your question. He says, do I have to fight it, the Germans in the underground, or do I have to float into space, or do I have to barely survive a ship sinking in Alaska in order to find the true meaning of my life? And the three of us laugh, but we don't really have a ready answer. And finally, Ed White, the astronaut, comes up with the answer that I've used ever since. He says, look, the three of us are like Missouri mules. We are so into what we're doing with our lives that we miss the larger picture. And you have to hit us over the head with a 2x4 before we finally get it. And so I always tell that answer that the signs are all around us. And I do, I've done a lot of workshops, at least pre-COVID, about trying to answer that question. And I tell people that the answers most often are not at all violent, not at all outrageously outrageous. They're simple things. You, you stopped at a red light, for example. What is that? Gives you 38 seconds to do nothing. Well, instead of thinking who's going to win the ball game that night, spend that 38 seconds just saying, huh, what else is there to what I'm doing or whatever? And some stuff may pop out, and it may not pop out then, but maybe a week later you're passing a billboard and the ad on the billboard has a few words in it that are speaking the same call, a deeper meaning. Or maybe it's a child, maybe your own child that asks one of those innocent child questions, or maybe it's a trusted friend and you're just talking and he's saying you really you're not bored with your job. You're really satisfied with it. And you're saying, "Mm, well, it's a good living and, but there are all kinds of things around us. And then we take stock of who we are because you look at it's really important to assess who you are in terms of your skills and resources and contacts. I mean, if you're really good with music, then maybe what you do with your life is something to do as a musician. Or if you're really good with figures, maybe it's something you do as a scientist or an engineer or whatever. But you take stock of your own talents, of who you are, and then you seek to apply them. But the key thing is finding meaning. And here, I know I'm not wrong. Every single one of us, even people that you may totally disagree with, are looking for the same basic thing, to find a meaning, a personal meaning for their lives. And we all want it. We all want to look at the mirror in the morning and who looks back from that mirror. We want to know we're on the planet for a reason. We're not just here marking time because that'd be like being a fine Swiss watch with no hands on it. We all want a sense of meaning and personal purpose that's satisfying. And so I found it initially in adventuring, and it turned out to be pretty shallow. And I've got a lot of friends, and so do you, that think they found that meaning in money and power. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm not sure that's going to last forever. And I keep telling people that the most stable source of meaning in their lives is to find some kind of service. Doesn't mean you have to stop being a businessman, for example. You use the word exit a lot in describing this podcast. Well, yeah, even before you exit, when you're still active in business, making a good product, selling it for a fair price with good labor conditions and sound environmental conditions, and being a good neighbor in the communities where your company operates, that's a service. So I keep telling people, because I have a lot of business audiences, I keep telling people that that's a service. And if you want to talk about exiting, that's a strange word. I wouldn't use that word, but you do. So anyway, I'll use it. exiting. Well, when you exit, well, look beyond. What are you going to play mahjong and golf for the 20 years you've got left? I don't think so. Look again at what makes your life meaningful, and then find what it is, and then do it. As my wife Ann says, we're still married after 44 years, by the way. As my wife Ann says, you lift up the corner of the rug you can lift. So you find that corner of the rug. But I want to emphasize again, no, it does not have to be dangerous and dramatic. For me, it was because I was like that Missouri mule. Nothing else was getting through.
Mm, got it. No, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I like the idea of finding meaning in the everyday experiences and, looking for clues that are there. You just, it's your filter system, what you see. And you can find that in just normal experiences and not wait for a crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. So one thing is somewhat related is a lot of people experience sort of an identity death once they're done with their business and they move on to the next chapter of their life. um, how would you recommend listeners deal with that, like as you've done so well, and find the finding meaning?
Sure. I would say the first thing, to put what I've already said in a different word, is to question your identity. Who were you? I mean, you were out there and you were successful. Your company invented a new product. You left as senior vice president, lots of money, whatever. Okay, fine. Your identity was all wrapped up in that. But there was always something deeper, and you never perhaps had the time or the attention to look for it. And especially now that you've got some time, spend that time. It might be taking a walk in the woods. It might be talking with trusted friends. It might be deliberately asking why you're stuck at that red light for 28 seconds and giving you a time to think. It's something. But you got to be, what you're looking for is what you see from that mirror in the morning. When it looks back at you, you got to feel totally satisfied that, yeah, I'm on the planet for a purpose, and it's a good purpose, and it fulfills me, and it provides passion for my life. And if you can't answer those questions affirmatively, then I'd say keep looking. I don't care if you have more money than Croesus. I don't care if everyone thinks you're God. If you haven't found that kind of personal passion for who you are, then you got to keep looking until you do. And you're never too old. I mean, God, we're all living to be in our 90s these days. You got plenty of time after you quote exit uh, to do that, and you have time even before you exit. But don't stop. Don't stop. And it's difficult. It's difficult because a lot of things that might provide meaning for your life you think are, absurd, or you could never do it. But again, you take a look at your resources and your skills and your contacts, and they may help point you toward where you might be looking. It may be something totally local, like volunteering with a local nonprofit. I don't know, from anything from working in a food bank to helping the city council redraw a plan for low-income housing because you've been a successful architect your whole life, and here's a chance to do something with that skill. Um, or maybe something totally different. Maybe it's like running for office. Maybe it's for getting involved in a protest march or whatever. But there's always something, but you have to look for it. And that may mean other people saying, "Oh, John, shut up and sit down. After all, you're 73 years old or you're 68 years old. You've lived your life. You're a rich guy. You have a wonderful family. You have grandkids. Just enjoy it, improve your golf game." But if that doesn't give you passion, no, golf game is not going to be enough.
Yeah, no, that's important. uh, I like that. And with the Giraffe Project, the whole premise is people sticking their neck out, right?
Yeah.
I was curious kind of what your thoughts are on that. Like, I think I read somewhere if you're not risking, you say this, if you're not risking, if you don't take a risk, you're not really living. I wanted to drill into that a little bit, and if you could share one of the stories that you've covered with the Draft Project of people sticking their neck out that stands out to you over the years.
Sure. Yeah, the saying is, I think I use it on my badass granddad. If you're not living a life with some risk in it, your life is boring and ultimately inconsequential. Now, I
Hmm.
really hesitated before I started saying that because I think it's kind of insulting to some people. What do you mean my life is inconsequential if I don't take risks? Well, like, I mean exactly what I'm saying. If you've never dared, if you've never stepped off the edge a little bit, then you're missing out. And in terms of examples, well, there's 2,000 examples. One that I just put up on Badass Granddad 2 weeks ago. A guy named Bob Bajek, yeah, Bob Bajek was a reporter in a small city in Indiana. Illinois. And it was a city where right outside of the city there was a big Air Force base. And the Air Force was there for a long time and then they closed the base, but they didn't do a good job of cleaning up after themselves. So it was a toxic waste dump. Fuel in the ground, all kinds of stuff the Air Force left behind. So nobody could build there because there was a toxic hazard, a hazard zone. And because they're all these everybody there was like tied to the Air Force and had contacts and stuff, the powers that be weren't doing anything about it. But Bob Bajik investigated this, and he investigated the size of the toxic problem, and it was huge. I mean, this crap was leaking into the land, leaking in landfills and polluting the water. And so he began writing newspaper stories about this. And he was told to shut up and sit down because there were too many contacts with too many other contacts in the Air Force. People didn't want to get involved because cleaning it up would cost millions of dollars and just live with it, you know. And Bob Bajek wouldn't live with it, and he kept hammering at it until finally he was fired from the newspaper for being just too persistent. So he used every other means he had to keep at it and getting his message out until finally he managed to convince enough people in the town to do something about it and to follow his lead. Filing lawsuits against the Air Force, whatever, throwing some of the rascals out in the city council, getting some people in who were really interested in safety for the town. Took him years to do that. He finally succeeds. The Air Force comes back. They spend $250 million sifting all the crap out of the landfill, cleaning things up, and they finally give all the land back to the city in pristine condition where you could like build houses on it or whatever. So Bob Bajek fought for years, lost his job, but never gave up. And why did he do it? Not because he wanted his name in lights. His name is still not in lights. He wanted to save lives. He wanted people not to develop premature cancers or all the other stuff that comes from living on or near a toxic waste dump. And so that's why we made Bob Bajek a giraffe hero. He certainly risked his career. Um, and he poured himself into this until he succeeded. Not all giraffes succeed, by the way. Out of the 2,000, there are a fair number that have crashed and burned, but they've tried.
Mm, wow. Yeah, and risking it all for something you believe in. Um, yeah, and that kind of ties into my next question. I know you talk to business groups all the time, and you have a coaching program too. What core principles should guide someone in a position of authority, like a business owner, especially when others are looking to them during times of change or uncertainty?
I would say the core operating principle, and I'm not a religious person, so if I was, I would probably say, well, look to your faith for some of these answers, but I'm not. So my answer is go back to that central premise. Look to what creates meaning in your life, and meaning in your life means also providing adequate guidance and support for employees, for example, so that you're meeting their concerns and maybe even inspiring some of them to follow your lead. So that's what's key. you find the meaning of your life, you find it in the service. Some of that service is making that, like I say, that good product, selling it for a fair price. But another part of that service is being a good boss, of looking at the people that work for you and realizing that you're involved with people's lives, and that means their families, their communities. You're responsible for a large hunk of that. And part of your service is to make sure that you do a good job with that. So it really does encompass a lot of answers to a lot of your questions. If you really see your life as a life where service has to be a major part of it, then almost automatically you're going to see that part of that service is giving a square deal to your employees.
Mm, no, that's really important. Thank you. Yeah, there's so many actionable insights from what you've discussed today. I really appreciate it. I know as we begin to wrap up here shortly, I wanted to give you opportunity to kind of share some last thoughts. Specifically, I wanted to ask, what are some practical things that people can implement, this week, say, to start looking beyond their personal needs, and sort of committing to ideals like you've been talking about with your purpose.
Yeah, well, I want to return to what Anne Medlock said, and her guidance is still my guidance. You lift up the corner of the rug you can lift up. If you're a farmer in Oklahoma, well, you're going to see one world and opportunities for being of service. Maybe it's in developing a better tornado warning system for your county. If you're a businessman in New York City, it's quite different. Maybe your service is looking at a corrupt or inefficient practice in your own company and sticking your neck out a little bit to help improve it. If you're a neurosurgeon in Seattle, maybe is to at least spend a little bit of time doing some free surgeries on people that can't afford your rate for operating on their heads. Whatever it is, it's different for all of us, but it all involves looking at something where your resources and your skills are important and can make a difference. And the Uber, the umbrella for all of it is that you're doing that not just because it's a good thing to do. You're doing it in a semi-selfish way because it is the way to find the true meaning and purpose of your life, which all of us seek. And so in a way, being of service is, you could say, is a little bit selfish because you're improving your own life and your own life is benefiting a huge amount. And not just are you a better person, you're having a better life.
Oh, that's huge. Wow. Yeah, no, thank you so much, John. Really appreciate all the insights you gave and sharing your incredible story. I think I found it fascinating. I hope the listeners I'm sure they'll find it also really entertaining. So yeah, I just wanted to, is there anywhere people can find you? Of course, there's your website, johngraham.org. And
Yeah, I
then,
will. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
oh yeah. Well, there's I invite emails. And I answer as many as I can. And my email is Graham, my name, at giraffe, GIRAFFE.org. It's amazing how many people can't spell giraffe, but it actually has two F's. Graham at giraffe.org. You've got the website for the giraffe.org website. You've got my website. You can look for my memoir Quest at a bookstore or from Amazon. Oh, it's now in as an audio book from any of the audio booksellers. Uh, yeah. So I'm here for the long term. People want to contact me, I utterly welcome it, and they can use these URLs, these websites, to find out a whole lot more.
awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, I'll leave everything in the show notes as well. It was a great conversation, John. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's great.